In this video, I'm continuing with my list of top 10 World Series of all time, going from 5 to number 1. Stick with me and I'll tell you all about them. What's going on, everybody? Thanks for joining me again on my channel, Brutus on Baseball. Last week I put out a video, my 6th to 10th best World Series of all time, and this video is going to continue that with my top 5. We just finished up the 2024 World Series with the Dodgers beating the Yankees. Great game 1, but the series as a whole definitely did not come anywhere close to the top 10 list, so no adjustments needed at least this year. In my video last week, I put in my criteria of what I consider to make a really great World Series, so let's go over those once again. Number 1, the series has to go to Game 7, meaning that the winner gets the glory and the loser goes home. If it doesn't go to Game 7, it's not really that competitive. Number 2, a lot of back and forth and lead changes throughout the series, whether in Games 1 or within a game. Late inning comebacks and extra inning heroics are always really good to add to the recipe. Number 3, Game 7 itself usually has to have been a nail-biter. If you go on a roller coaster with lots of loops and twists and drops, but the last minute of the ride is a slow coast to the finish line, it still ends up a bit disappointing, doesn't it? So an incredible finish helps the memory last even longer. Number 4, incredible, memorable events or individual performances always help, especially to cap off the series with an exclamation point. This isn't always the case, but it certainly helps. And number 5, this one's huge to me, is that the home team wins. There's no better finish than watching the team celebrate on the field in front of their home crowd with the fans celebrating there too. It doesn't have to be the case to make a great World Series, but I think it makes it better to me. And then number 6, an unexpected team winning. Having an underdog claim a victory against a perennial contender makes it that much sweeter for the rest of the baseball fans out there. And with all of that criteria in mind, let's get to the top 5. The number 5 series on my list is way back in 1912 between the Boston Red Sox and the New York Giants. The 1912 series featured one of the closest World Series of all time, with 4 games decided by 1 run and a 5th that actually ended in a tie, forcing an 8th game to be played. The games were played alternately between New York and Boston, a function of how things were done at that time and made easier with the short distance between those two cities. The Giants would score first against the great Smokey Joe Wood with 2 runs in the bottom of the 3rd inning, but the Red Sox would go ahead with a run in the 6th and 2 more in the 7th from big hits from Tris Speaker and Harry Hooper. The teams would go into the 9th inning with the Red Sox leading 4-2, but the Giants would scrabble together a run in the bottom half of the 9th, but Smokey Joe Wood, still in the game, would strike out the last 2 batters, stranding the tying run at 3rd to give Boston the 4-3 win. For Game 2, the Giants would throw the great Christy Mathewson to try and even the series up in the brand new Fenway Park. This game would not feature peak Mathewson, as he gave up 3 unearned runs in the 1st inning and would give up a total of 6 runs behind 5 Giants errors on that day. But the Giants offense would come to their aid as well, scoring 3 runs in the 8th inning off a misplayed ball from Duffy Lewis on an inclined hill that actually used to be present in front of the Green Monster at that time. The Sox would come back to tie it in the bottom of the 8th, and when neither team scored in the 9th inning, the game was sent into extra innings. The Giants put up a run in the top of the 10th, but Christy Mathewson, still pitching for the Giants, couldn't close the door and gave up an inside the park home run to Tris Speaker in the bottom of the 10th. Neither team would score in the 11th, and the game would be called at the end of that inning on account of darkness, to be ruled a tie instead of continuing play the next day. Game 3 would be played in Boston for a second night because the previous night wasn't finished, and would see an incredible game pitched by Rube Marquardt of the Giants, as he kept the Red Sox scoreless until the 9th inning. The Giants had scored 1 in the 2nd and 1 in the 5th, and with a tying run on 3rd base in the 9th, Marquardt was able to retire the last batter to preserve the 2-1 victory for the Giants. Game 4 would return to New York, but the Red Sox would come out on top with a 3-1 victory behind another complete game from Smokey Joe Wood. Game 5, back in Boston again, would see Matheson take the mound again in Fenway, but the Red Sox would score 2 in the third inning off of him, and that's all they would need, cruising to a 2-1 win, giving the Red Sox a 3-1 lead in the series. Back in New York for Game 6, the Giants would jump out of the gates with 5 runs in the first inning in support of their pitcher Rube Marquardt again, who would cruise to the 5-2 victory. Game 7 would return to Boston, but New York would beat up on the Sox by scoring 6 runs in the first inning, this time off of Smokey Joe Wood, and evening the series with the Red Sox with an 11-4 win. Based on their play in the game, there were rumors that the Red Sox had actually given the game to the Giants in a protest for not being given a share of the gate receipts for the tied Game 2, since no team won. But whether the game was honest or thrown by the Red Sox, there would be a forced Game 8 to decide the series. The location of Game 8 was decided based on a coin flip and would be played at Fenway in Boston. It would prove to be an incredible pitching duel between Hugh Bedient and Christy Matheson, as each pitcher would give up only 1 run heading into the 9th, with a tie score. Smokey Joe Wood entered the game for the Red Sox in the 8th inning, and neither team would score in the 9th, sending it to the 10th inning as well. Wood gave up a run in the top of the 10th, giving the Giants a 2-1 lead heading to the bottom half of the inning. The first batter in the bottom half of the inning reached base on a dropped ball in front of center fielder Fred Snodgrass, followed by a walk and then a foul pop-up that dropped between 3 players and allowed Tris Speaker a second life, in which he singled the tying run in. A few batters later, Larry Gardner lifted a fly ball to right field with the bases loaded to score the winning run on a sac fly in front of the Boston faithful. To date, this is the only World Series to end on a sac fly. In the end, it was probably the Giants' 16 errors that series that cost them the championship. The number 4 World Series on my list was 1986, the New York Mets against the Boston Red Sox. Featuring one of the most memorable moments in World Series history, the 1986 World Series featured the Red Sox seeking their first title since 1918, and the Mets looking to cap another miracle season. Game 1 would feature a classic pitcher's duel between Bruce Hurst of the Red Sox and Ron Darling of the Mets that would end in a 1-0 win for the Red Sox, with the only difference being an error by second baseman Tim Tuffle in the 7th inning that allowed Jim Rice to score from second base. Game 2 should have been another pitching duel between young Roger Clemens and a young Dwight Gooden, but neither pitcher was all that effective that day. But the Red Sox would easily handle the Mets, winning 9-3 to win the first 2 games in New York and heading to Boston. But the Mets would start Game 3 in Boston with a bang, scoring 4 runs in the first inning and never looking back, winning 7-1 behind a strong pitching performance from Bobby Ojeda. Game 4 would be more of the same behind another strong pitching performance by Ron Darling and fueled by 2 home runs from Gary Carter, and the Mets would take Game 4 by a score of 6-2. But Boston would finally take one win at home, Game 5 by a score of 4-2 behind another stellar outing from Bruce Hurst. Game 6 would return to New York with the Mets facing elimination. The first 5 games generally weren't all that competitive or exciting, with the exception of Game 1, but Game 6 would change all of that. The game featured Bobby Ojeda on the mound against Roger Clemens, and the first moment of excitement in the game was when a Mets fan parachuted onto the field and was immediately arrested in the first inning. The Red Sox jumped out to an early 2-0 lead while Clemens cruised, but the Mets tied the game up again as they chased Clemens in the 5th inning. Both teams would trade runs again, with Boston scoring 1 in the top of the 7th and the Mets scoring in the bottom of the 8th, and the game would go into extra innings knotted at 3 apiece. Boston would come out roaring in the top of the 10th inning though, scoring first on a solo home run from the bat of Dave Henderson, and then following that up with a double from Wade Boggs that eventually plated another run. In the bottom of the 10th, The first 2 outs were recorded so quickly that the words "Congratulations Boston Red Sox, 1986 World Champions" briefly flashed across the scoreboard in New York. But that's when 3 consecutive base hits put the Mets within 1 run and runners in scoring position. A wild pitch allowed another run to score, tying the game once again. But then Mookie Wilson hit a ground ball to Bill Buckner at first base, a routine ground ball that should have sent the team to the 11th inning for another go-round, but the ball somehow skipped right through Buckner's legs, and the Mets scored the winning run to win it and force a Game 7. Game 7 would feature the 2 best pitchers from the series in Ron Darling versus Bruce Hurst. Darling would give up 3 runs in only 3 full innings, with Hurst having the better game, at least until the 6th inning when he was chased after giving up 3 runs himself. And that would be what would turn the tides for the Mets, as they would then score 3 more runs in the 7th inning and 2 more runs in the 8th inning, bringing home their 2nd World Championship right there in front of the Mets faithful at Shea Stadium. The number 3 World Series on my list is 1975, the Cincinnati Reds and the Boston Red Sox. In this series, you had a team in the Reds that was going for their 2nd straight World Series victory in 1975. On the other hand were the Boston Red Sox, who we just talked about in the last one, who hadn't won the World Series since 1918. The Red Sox and their fans were eager to win, but would the Big Red Machine let them? The series was fairly even, seesawing back and forth with each game. Game 1 would feature a pitching duel, with both Louis Tiant and Don Gullett pitching shutouts into the 7th inning, when Louis Tiant himself actually opened the floodgates with a single, and the Red Sox scored 6 runs in the inning to come away with the Game 1 victory, 6-0 at Fenway Park. The Reds were about to lose again in Game 2, down 2-1 in the 9th inning, but they mounted a comeback and beat the Red Sox 3-2 before shifting to Riverfront Stadium in Cincinnati. Game 3 was another nail-biter, with the Reds up 5-3 in the 9th inning, but the Red Sox would score 2 runs in the top of that inning, sending the game into extras. The Reds would eventually prevail, though, scoring a run in the bottom of the 10th and beating the Sox 6-5. The Red Sox would come back in Game 4 with a tight 5-4 win behind Louis Tiant again to even the series, with all the scoring done before the 5th inning in that game. With 1 game left in Cincinnati, the Reds came away with a more decisive 6-2 win, and giving the Reds the advantage 3-2 heading back to Boston. Even after 3 one-run games, including an extra inning affair, Game 6 would end up providing the most memorable game of the series and perhaps all time in the World Series. The Reds were up 6-3 and looking good entering the bottom of the 8th inning, but pinch hitter Bernie Carbo was sent up to the plate and battled through a very tough at-bat to tie the game at 6 with a 3-run shot. The Red Sox looked poised to win the game in the bottom of the 9th with the bases loaded and no outs. But Fred Lynn would foul out to left field, and George Foster would make the throw to Johnny Bench at home to tag out the runner trying to score from third base for the 2nd out. The game would go to extra innings and would remain scoreless through the 10th and 11th innings as well, until Carlton Fisk stepped up to lead off the bottom of the 12th inning. On a 1-0 count, he lifted a ball down the left field line in what has since become one of the most iconic shots in baseball history. Fisk watched the ball's flight, waving his arms to will it to stay fair, and jumped in joy when the ball ricocheted off the foul pole to win Game 6 for the Red Sox and tie the series back up. After the heroic finish in Game 6, a finish so incredible that it's been talked about for decades and even featured in an Oscar-winning film, Game 7 is often forgotten, but was also an incredible game. The Red Sox went out on top with 3 runs in the bottom of the 3rd inning, but the Reds would claw their way back, first with a 2-run home run in the 6th inning by Tony Perez, and then a single run in the 7th to tie the game at 3-all. After a scoreless 8th inning, the Reds had Ken Griffey on third base and Pete Rose on first when Joe Morgan blooped a ball into center field to score Griffey and put the Reds up by 1 run. Reds reliever Will McEnany then put the Red Sox down in order in the bottom of the ninth inning to clinch the championship for the Reds with a 4-3 win in Game 7, establishing the Big Red Machine as a dynasty and extending the Red Sox fans' misery for at least another decade and what turned out to be more. The number 2 World Series on my list is 1991. The Minnesota Twins against the Atlanta Braves. The 1991 World Series featured a strong Minnesota team against a resurgent Braves team that had been bad throughout the previous decade. The home team would win every game of the series, with lots of rumors of foul play by the Twins staff, turning up the air circulation toward the outfield when the Twins were hitting and having it blow in whenever the Braves were batting. Game 1 started in Minnesota, and the Twins won relatively easily, 5-2 behind the pitching of Jack Morris. Game 2 would be tighter, with Tom Glavine and Kevin Tapani pitching to a 2-2 tie going into the 8th inning. But the Twins took the lead when light-hitting third baseman Scott Leos managed to drive a pitch from Glavine into the seats, and the Twins would coast behind closer Rick Aguilera to preserve the win 3-2. Going into Atlanta for Game 3, the teams would trade leads as Chili Davis would come up with the game-tying home run, and the game would remain tied 4-4 heading into extra innings. Twins manager Tom Kelly would use all of his bench players by the 11th inning, and in the 12th inning was forced to bring in his final player, closer Rick Aguilera, to pinch hit with the bases loaded in order to preserve the pitcher's spot in the order. Aguilera would fly out to center field to end the inning. The Braves would end the game 5-4 in the bottom of the 12th with a single to left field by Mark Lemke to drive in David Justice. Game 4 would feature Jack Morris versus John Smoltz, with both pitchers pitching effectively and the game going into the 9th inning tied at 2 apiece. Mark Lemke led off the 9th inning this time and hit a triple off the outfield wall to set up a sacrifice fly from journeyman Jerry Willard that barely scored Lemke from third on a close play at the plate to win the game 3-2. Game 5 would be a blowout and a rematch between Kevin Tapani and Tom Glavine, with the Braves winning 14-5. Game 6, back in Minnesota now, would see the Twins jump out on Steve Avery quickly with 2 runs in the first inning behind the bat of Kirby Puckett. But things would settle as the teams found themselves tied at 3 apiece entering the 9th inning. The game remained knotted at 3 all the way until the 11th inning, when Puckett came up again against Charlie Leibrandt and delivered a 2-1 pitch into the bleachers to win the game 4-3 and send the series to a Game 7, a moment that is memorialized outside Target Field with a statue of Puckett pumping his fist as he rounds the bases. Game 7 would turn out to be a classic, with a rematch between Jack Morris and John Smoltz to decide the series. Both starters were phenomenal, with Smoltz pitching a shutout for 7 2/3 innings, while Morris also threw an even longer shutout for his outing. The game remained tied at 0 all the way through the 9th inning and went into extras to decide the world champion. Initially, Tom Kelly was going to remove Jack Morris for the top of the 10th, but Morris refused, insisting his night wasn't done. He went back out and retired the Braves in order in the top of the 10th in one of the greatest pitching performances in postseason history, and likely the moment that eventually gave Morris a plaque in the Hall of Fame. Dan Gladden would lead off the 10th for the Twins and bloop a hit right in front of the left fielder that would bounce over his head and allow Gladden to reach second base. After a sacrifice bunt got him to third, Gladden scored on a single to left field that went over the heads of a drawn-in outfield, and the Twins would win the game for Jack Morris after his incredible performance in front of the hometown fans, and bring the championship to Minnesota since the team had moved there from Washington in 1961. Some incredible close games, but not quite the best World Series in my opinion. I give that one to 2001 between the Arizona Diamondbacks and the New York Yankees. A series that had some incredibly close games with late inning heroics and an incredible Game 7 as well. The first two games were played in Arizona, and neither was much for competition, as the D-backs won Game 1 9-1 behind Curt Schilling and the bat of Luis Gonzalez. But this was followed up by a 4-0 shutout in Game 2 behind a stellar performance from Randy Johnson, who pitched the complete game shutout, almost unheard of in today's game. But the Yankees would take control as the series moved back to New York, winning Game 3 by a score of 2-1 behind Roger Clemens, who pitched 7 innings of 1-run ball, followed by Mariano Rivera to close out the game. Game 4 featured Curt Schilling again for the D-backs, pitching on 3 days of rest, and he once again pitched a gem, allowing only 1 run in 7 innings. The D-backs were up 3-1 going into the bottom of the 9th inning, which is when the Yanks really turned it on. The D-backs closer, Byung-Hyun Kim, a 22-year-old rookie, was brought into the 8th inning to close out the final 2 innings for the Diamondbacks. He struck out the side in the 8th, but in the 9th, he allowed a single to Paul O'Neill, and then with 2 outs, Tino Martinez hit a long bomb into right center field to tie the game and send it into extra innings. Bob Brenly decided to send Kim out for a 3rd inning of work, and after 2 quick outs, Derek Jeter stepped up, worked the count full, and then hit an opposite field home run to win the game 4-3. Game 5 was more of the same, as Miguel Bautista took the mound against Mike Mussina and proceeded to pitch 7 2/3 scoreless innings to put the D-backs up 2-0 going into the bottom of the 9th once again. But also once again, Brenly called on his closer Kim for the 2nd night in a row, even though he had just pitched 3 innings the game before. Jorge Posada doubled to open up the 9th inning, but then Kim was able to get the next 2 batters out before Scott Brosius launched a pitch over the left field wall to tie the game up again in the bottom of the 9th for the 2nd straight night and send the game into extra innings. The game would go scoreless to the bottom of the 12th inning until Alfonso Soriano finished the game with an RBI single to put the Yankees up 3-2, with the series heading back to Arizona. Game 6 wouldn't be much of a match, as Randy Johnson was called on again and pitched 7 innings in a game that saw the D-backs up 15-0 by the 4th inning, and would go on to win 15-5. But Game 7 would be the one for the ages, with Roger Clemens matching up against Curt Schilling. Both pitchers lasted deep into the game, with the Yankees holding on to a razor-thin lead of 2-1 after the 8th inning. Joe Torre brought in his closer, Mariano Rivera, in the 8th inning for a 2-inning save, and Brenly did the same, but this time decided not to bring in his young closer Kim back onto the mound, but instead going with the previous night's starter, Randy Johnson, to hold the Yankees. It turned out to be a genius move, as Johnson held the Yankees for 2 innings, allowing the Diamondbacks to stay within 1 run as they came up in the bottom of the 9th. Normally, the game would be considered over given Mariano Rivera's track history in the postseason, but tonight, Mark Grace led off the 9th with a single, followed by a throwing error by Rivera on a bunt attempt that resulted in runners on 1st and 2nd, and then a double down the first base line by Tony Womack to score a run to tie the game and leave runners at 2nd and 3rd. Rivera would hit Craig Counsell with a pitch to load the bases, and finally, Luis Gonzalez would come up to the plate and float a ball just over Derek Jeter's head into center field to score the winning run for the Diamondbacks. It would be Mariano Rivera's only career loss in the playoffs, and Curt Schilling and Randy Johnson would be named co-MVPs for all of the incredible pitching they did in the series. The D-backs outscored the Yankees 37-14 in the series, so although it was tight, the better team obviously won, and they managed to win it with an iconic walk-off hit in front of the home crowd. So that is my list. I can totally understand some people out there seeing 1975 as the best or 1991 as the best, but I chose that one for that first all-time because 1975 Game 7 didn't finish in a walk-off, and 1991 was a great finish for the Twins. It was the pitching of Jack Morris, and there's just something a bit more exciting about the walk-off to win the World Series. All 3 of those series had incredible games earlier in the series, so I can see any of them being your favorite. Thanks for joining me today. Until I see you next time, keep talking baseball, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you around.